Pit Talk, brought to you by Shannon's.
Cars are our passion. Building, restoring, or modifying. It's about making it our own. It's an obsession. Shannon's know what it's worth. That's why the agreed value includes all your modifications. Get a quote online today.
This is the moment then that we've all been waiting for.
4 in a row, Max.
Here comes Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris.
They are playing hardball out there at the moment.
The pivotal moment of 2024.
Hello and welcome to Pit Talk, brought to you by Shannon's. On this week's episode, Max Verstappen claims his third win of the season ahead of McLaren in a muddle over team orders with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. And we look back at the Moto GP round in Barcelona and ahead to this weekend's first enduro in the Supercars Championship. My name's Michael Laminato. It's great to have your company and the company of my co-host. Was he saying boo or Zach boo rounds at the podium ceremony? It's Matt Clayton.
I was saying both, Michael. It's like nice to spread that. That was quite an interesting little aside of many things that were interesting in the tail end of that Grand Prix that I'm sure we'll get to in the next half an hour, but I didn't quite see that coming.
No, I was surprised by that. I mean, you know, we know that the crowd in Monza is always partisan, but not normally about third-party matters.
Exactly.
They had an opinion on everything.
Piastri's a good Italian surname, isn't it?
I suppose so. They assumed that he must have been your future Ferrari driver, I guess.
Maybe he will be.
A little bit of a twist, I think. But of course, that was after what became the unexpected climax of this Grand Prix, because despite a very action-packed first few laps, not too much happened in the middle of the Grand Prix, at least in terms of the lead battle, until the last 10 or so laps when it came time for McLaren to make its pit stops for Norris and Piastri in second and third. Pretty comfortable, but uncompetitive, I suppose, second or third, non-contested second and third. And lo and behold, Norris ended up with a slower pit stop and behind Piastri. And the contentious decision, Matt, of course, this has been the talking point in the Formula One world for the last 24 or so hours, was that McLaren asked them to change back. The team justified afterwards that this was about fairness, sporting fairness. It was a team mistake. The drivers, on their accounts, of course, unsurprisingly, I suppose, towed the party line afterwards. That's been very much the story at McLaren all season. Look, let's just start. What was your reaction to it?
I'd like to read a piece from a story that I read today from a bloke called Michael Laminato on foxsports.com.au. I'm going to read your own story back to you because this sums it up quite nicely. Team orders are common in Formula One. Usually they take place when a following driver is clearly faster than the leader or when they're on different strategies. Rare, however, does a team intervene on the grounds of natural justice. Rarer still does it happen when there's a championship on the line. It's ironic that McLaren's laudable efforts to be scrupulously fair in this championship battle risk the team itself becoming the chief source of controversy. So the reason...
better myself.
Well, thank you. But to my mind, are we now starting to litigate over luck, are we? And what can of worms have we just taken the lid off here if you're McLaren? Because, look, Lando Norris was, to use a Sky Sports word, robbed. He had a really unfortunate pit stop, nothing to do with him. He did nothing wrong. To start litigating the reversal of positions and the way we're going to allow these two to race based on luck, where does this end? Is there a natural end point to this? Is the end point where they've won the Constructors' Championship, which they'll do next round in Baku? Is the end where Max Verstappen is mathematically eliminated from title contention and then only a McLaren can win the World Championship? So you can't justify decisions like this based on the fact that someone else might sneak in if we don't do this properly. I just thought it was a massive overreach. And yes, Oscar Piastri has his championship lead by virtue of the fact that Lando Norris had a very unlucky engine failure in Zandvoort. This was another piece of poor luck for Norris. But are we really going to start flipping drivers around based on fortune? And where does this actually stop? I mean, are we in a situation now where McLaren say to Oscar Piastri, look, Norris had a DNF and lost 18 points on a day where you won the Grand Prix at Zandvoort because of something that was out of his control. So we'd like you to also lose 18 points at some point to make... Like, where do we draw the line with this?
Yeah, I think that for me is the interesting point. And I do think this is This is really an unusually nuanced situation, in my opinion at least, because it's rare. I mean, every circumstance in Formula 1 is different, right? Every incident we ever analyse, they're very rarely that a two are alike enough to say, well, you know, this is the way it should have been done because it has been done. But I find this so interesting because in this circumstance, you almost had your test tube experiment, right? These two cars virtually had no one else they were racing against. They happened to be roughly the same place on track.
Yep.
Two pit stops that were meant to be identical, exactly the same tyres, pretty much the same age. Two drivers that are almost exactly as fast as one another. And you happen to get this poor luck. So I kind of see that. But then there's that ethical element, I guess, from the team's perspective, which is they made a mistake and interfered in the championship unexpectedly in a way they didn't want to. I thought it was interesting the way that, I think it was Andrea Stella, if not it was Oscar Piastri certainly, who talked about wanting to take the heat off the team members who are not the high-profile athletes, which I also found kind of interesting. One element I want to put to you, though, that I sort of think has gone a little bit under the radar, and Piastri sort of alluded to this in his Sky Sports post-race interview, which I think you can see on the KO replay. And he only alluded to it, so I guess it's sort of my interpretation, but he talked about if this had happened, because it's important to remember as well, the mechanics who do pit stops are jointly from both garages,
Correct.
right? And there's this weird, that's the element of motorsport that's unusual. But the risk of creating a rift between the garages then starts to happen if a pit stop, because we don't know who was on that front left, we don't know whose garage it was from, who was on that front left tyre. The risk of a rift happening because the focus goes on the mechanics that made a mistake and influenced the championship, I also thought was interesting. There are a lot of elements. I'm not necessarily saying I'm falling on either side of the fence here. I do have a opinion, I suppose, but it changes a lot. I'd be surprised. But there's a lot that goes into this decision more than just, well, he was ahead before and now he's not and we should go back to it. And I found that kind of interesting, the way Piastri summed it up.
But you're talking about the human element. This is a human sport. Like, if we want to take the human element out of it and the randoms, then why don't we just simulate all of this and not bother actually having a world championship at this point? Let's just do it all on someone's laptop and let us know who wins at the end of it.
I watched that automated racing league once.
Oh, and?
Wasn't very good.
Right. So, what was interesting to me is Piastri's reaction here. I actually thought he played this really, really intelligently. In that clearly he's not going to be happy with the outcome here. I thought he put the question out over the radio because you know that's going to be broadcast. And he has kept his powder dry here for two reasons. One, he has a 31-point championship lead. Two, there's 8 rounds to go. So if they're now going to start setting a precedent for we are going to treat these two drivers unscrupulously fairly the entire way through, this may pay Piastri back somewhere down the line, if he actually needs it to be paid back.
Yes.
So to my mind, that's a card that he now has to play at a moment that he can deploy that for his own benefit. And McLaren are kind of boxed into a bit of a corner here because if he chooses to play this card, if he needs to play it, they can't very well go back on what they've done in this instance because that's going to unravel all of the good they're trying to do here by trying to make this as fair as possible. And so to my mind, I thought he handled it. Now, whether it was pre-rehearsed or in the moment or whatever, I actually thought that he handled it incredibly well and that you can kick up a massive stink here and you go back through Formula One history and you can nominate 10 drivers right now that would have thrown every toy they had out of the cot. But there's 8 rounds to go. That's the key part for me. If this is happening with 3 rounds to go, it's a different response. Even if the points gap is still the same. If there's 3 rounds left, then perhaps you go, hang on a minute. No, that's not right. He's kept his powder dry for another day, and it's a card that he will be able to play at some point if he needs to. Now, whether that was intentional or not, I thought in the moment that was actually pretty savvy.
Yeah, I like the idea. You know, we talked about it after the Dutch Grand Prix. He's got this big lead now, and we talked about, well, now he can start to play a little bit that numbers game. It doesn't have to be at 100% all the time. I actually think in this instance, it wasn't so much the equation saying, well, I don't necessarily need the 3 points. It felt to me like those 3 points had been cashed in for something else, which is this political card. And it reminds me, and we talked about this after the British Grand Prix, the way he responded after the penalty for the safety car. And he put the question out there, and I surely didn't expect a positive response from it. But he said, well, if you guys think the penalty was unfair, why don't we swap back and we'll race again? And of course it wasn't going to happen. But then again, I say, of course, something similar-ish happened this weekend. Similar-ish, I emphasise the ish part. But that's another little building block for an argument he may need to make down the line, which I think is very interesting. Because if we take to the logical extension the decision-making McLaren appears to have made, it's worth emphasising here as well, Andrea Stella in particular says, and I like the way he says it because I think it gets him out of some needing to answer some questions. And for what it's worth, I think he manages the team very well. I'm not being critical of him, but he talks about not rules, but values and principles. And the great thing about values and principles is it's up to you to decide how they kind of apply. It's not a hard and fast rule, right? But these principles decided in Hungary as an example. I know we already mentioned this. But that Lando Norris accidentally ending up on the faster strategy, and it was an accident, but that was fair enough. and the penalty in Silverstone was fair enough. Maybe going forward now, if we find ourselves in a similar situation, Piastri gets a great start, leading the race, Norris is fifth, but he does the one-stop, whatever is the case, and ends up ahead. Piastri says, but he's on a different, you've given him a different strategy, you've affected the outcome of this race without because the other thing that I think is important distinction here is that Norris gave his permission to be pit second.
Yes.
And at that point, because he's the lead driver, he gets to control what happens.
Yep.
You can argue that that's kind of on him what happens subsequent to that. If he gets the slow stop, that's his point.
You've ceded control of that.
Yeah, and so I think that this now, and this is the problem for McLaren going forward, because while I'm surprising if exactly this situation happened again, these drivers are so closely matched, and we know that at some races you do have other drivers in the mix. It's not inconceivable that a similar situation happens, in which case Piastri will say, well, hang on, now we've got these different understanding of fairness.
The whole concept of having team orders based around luck is the thing that I don't necessarily like here. Now, the penalty Piastri got at Silverstone was very stiff, and you could argue whether it was just or not, but it was still an inverted commas mistake.
Yes,
he made a mistake, and you pay the price for that mistake. So let's just have a hypothetical situation. Piastri comes in for his first pit stop in Baku in 2 weeks' time, and a Sauber gets released in front of him in the pit lane, and it's an unsafe release, and Piastri has to check up, and he loses 1.7 seconds as he exits the pit lane. Like, get on the radio to Lando and say, Lando, can you lose 1.7 seconds on your next lap because Oscar's been unfairly compromised by someone else in the pits? Like, what are we doing here? We're making this far too complicated. But I did want to, we could do 3 hours on this. Let's not. I want to get to a narrative that we're reading a lot through comments to anything that you're writing, and just in the general Australian sporting space. This whole McLaren wants Norris to win the title, not Piastri narrative. Let's open more cans of worms here. Because to my mind, we're kind of asking the wrong question here. Does McLaren expressly want this to happen? No, I don't think so. Is there some justification in McLaren preferring Lando Norris to be the driver that ends its World Championship route that's gone back since Lewis Hamilton? From a business point of view, yes, because they've invested a lot of time and a lot of money in Norris as he's come all the way through. He's a McLaren guy through and through. McLaren swooped on Piastri because Alpine left a loophole open in Piastri's contract. And when Piastri signed with McLaren, we never thought we would be discussing a potential World Championship push within 3 seasons. And I go back to this because I was right in the thick of covering this the last time it happened. It's the Webber-Vettel situation at Red Bull. And I dug out a quote from the Brazil 2010 press conference that I remember really clearly. I think I wasn't supposed to be in the hunt at all, so maybe it's been quite inconvenient. And that's Mark Webber in the penultimate race of 2010. And if you're looking at it from McLaren's point of view, just as a return on investment, of course you would prefer the person you've invested all this time and money and resource in to win the World Championship against basically anybody else. But if the outcome is to win the World Championship, it makes sense that they might prefer it to be Norris. Am I wrong?
No, I see that argument. I was thinking similar the way that Mark would talk about not a direct favouritism in the team. Although there were some instances that probably
he
got
probably
pretty
could
close
have,
to that.
yeah.
But talking about an emotional preference,
Yes.
which has an effect on decision making.
Yeah.
I don't. If that's there at McLaren, I don't think it's to the magnitude it was at Red Bull, or
Not
let's
at all.
say continues to be at Red Bull.
Well,
I don't think that that's there. I think there is a justification for that. I think there's also though McLaren. And I concede in the decision-making this weekend the idea that by making this team order, it actually takes everything away from the drivers and is all about the team. It kind of protects the brands of both drivers, right? Like you can't now say, whatever happens at the end of the year, if it's decided by 3 points or whatever the difference is, that it had anything to do with Piastri getting an unfair advantage because the team accidentally prioritised him at the pit stop by giving Norris a slow stop. So you can also almost see the reverse here. And this goes back to that scrupulously fair approach they're taking, which is that one of them is going to win the championship. McLaren's going to get its first drivers' champion since Lewis Hamilton.
Correct.
Right? If the team has to absorb stress and reputational damage, but not at the expense of the drivers, maybe that's preferable, because as much as the team is the big show, and we talk about the team's number one, in this year when the team's going to win both titles, the talking point is going to be the driver that wins the title, not the
Yeah.
fact that McLaren's won another championship.
I agree, but sometimes the right driver doesn't win the championship.
Oh, sure.
2016,
yeah.
Nico Rosberg won the world championship, mostly because Lewis Hamilton blew up in Malaysia, and that would have been, that was a stroke of bad luck. In 2010, as much as it was tough to take at the time for Australian fans, Sebastian Vettel won the world championship, and he won the world championship because he went out and won the last race. But I will, quick 60-second story time here.
Yes, go.
I was there in Abu Dhabi in 2010. And I remember having to fight my way through the Vettel celebration party in the Red Bull hospitality to get to Webber. I was the only Australian journo that spoke to Mark that night. And there was a wake going on in one corner of the Red Bull hospitality unit, and the largest party of all time, because it was their first world championship in 2010. But the emotional investment you talked about, the whole night was trying to imagine what that would have been like if it had been reversed. And the older guy whose speed was inconvenient came in, and he won the championship over the guy that they'd invested all the time and money and resource and emotion in. Now, different ends of their career, obviously. Vettel turned out to be a pretty damn good driver. Mark Webber was a very good driver, but not a world champion. But that comment about the inconvenient thing, I can't help. And of course, the irony of all of this is Piastri is managed by Mark Webber. All the parallels 15 years on. But you can't tell me that if McLaren had a preference as to who they would prefer to win the world championship, hand on heart, why wouldn't you prefer the person that you've invested all this time and money over all these years into? They're going to win the world championship, terrific. Are we making this far more complicated than it needs to be right now?
Yeah, and it will be very interesting to see how it goes down after the championship is decided one way or another. We've already heard Zach Brown talk about the way they've asked both drivers how they'd like to be dealt with after Abu Dhabi, given one of them won't win it. That will be interesting. I want to put one question to you before we sort of wrap up the McLaren angle here, which was the talking point.
Haven't we got two and a half more hours on McLaren?
Oh, we've got plenty of time. We've got as long as you like. Go back to the audio-only podcast after this as an extended edition. There's been some things made about the fact that Piastri very quickly acquiesced to the team order. There have been some opinions put out there that he's not ruthless enough for that, asking the question whether or not Max Verstappen or Michael Schumacher or insert great champion here, Ayrton Senna, would have done the same that he did. I think that's kind of interesting because the context of all of those drivers is very different to the context at McLaren.
Yes.
Do you think there's a situation in which Oscar would have ignored that team order though? If it was for the victory, do you think it would have been different?
Not necessarily, because I think that the biggest number for me is the 8 races to go. In that he knows, say if it was for the victory, he knows that he's winning the court of public opinion on that one. And he would still have a championship lead. So he becomes the winner even if he doesn't win that race, if that's for the victory of that particular race. So to me, the number is not so much whether it's third to second, second to first, how many races are there left? And does he have the requisite ruthlessness to be able to do what he needs to do? As we get closer to Abu Dhabi, I think if that needs to be deployed, it will come out. I just think 8 races to go, it's a third of the season. It's it's a long time to keep things at that emotional pitch. And I just thought the smart move, yes, did he acquiesce a little bit too meekly, perhaps in this instance, but I think you can't just say that without looking at the context of how many races there are to go and the way that Formula One operates these days. It's so much more open. I think you talked about Michael Schumacher and Max Verstappen. They've never had a teammate that's been close to them in a world championship situation, so it's not a comparison in my mind. I just thought that I liked the way he played it in that he bought himself some cards to play in the future if he needs to, and he can do that because he's in a position of advantage. He still has a 31-point championship lead.
It's still enormous. I'm inclined to agree. I think that Piastri is smart enough that I'm willing to believe that in the lap or whatever amount of time he had to make that decision, he thought it through and decided that there was much more upside to having that card in his pocket than having the argument with the team, which he may have ended up losing by the end of the race anyway. They may have verbally beat him down from a position, much like they did Norris in Hungary last year.
And then what if you lose that for the remainder of the season? That's the bigger play here.
And the greater difficulty after that, if you ignore a team order at this point with this advantage, is that maybe the team then isn't 100% on your side in the way they were. Or when you do need, think about Azerbaijan last year when Norris did help him win the Grand Prix by slowing down Sergio Perez. Maybe that wouldn't happen. And there is precedent for that to be required, considering something we haven't talked about is the fact that Piastri was asked to help Norris make it through to Q3 this weekend, which I think is also quietly remarkable. I understand the team interest argument better there because it's in the team's interest to have, I guess, both drivers in Q3. I kind of get that. But that is an understatedly remarkable thing to ask a title rival to do.
Also, if you're Lando Norris and you're in a McLaren, why do you need any help getting into Q3?
Yeah, for sure. I think that question's there. So, in the unlikely event, because Piastri's been much less of a position to require the help of his teammate this year, but we can't say that won't be needed.
Well, you left out one key word, yet.
Yes, exactly. And like I say, in Azerbaijan last year, that was it. Could happen again. That feels like a bit of a Piastri track. It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. It's not really about... I thought by now we'd be talking about a flashpoint and some tension. But weirdly, it's not about that. It's about the corner McLaren has built for itself and then backed itself into. That is going to be really interesting to see how it unfolds over the next 8 races. But that was a fascinating way to end the European season, I thought.
It was. Should we also just mention that Max Verstappen won the Grand Prix?
Oh, I said it at the top.
We're 20 minutes into it. It's like 2023 all over again.
Yes, it really was that kind of race, actually. Only third win of the year, worth reflecting on.
Yes.
2 of them in Italy. Good for him.
Indeed.
An Italian race engineer. Great outcome. Let's move on to Move of the Week, brought to you by Shannon's. 2 races this weekend, of course. The Barcelona Motorcycle Grand Prix, as well as the Italian Formula 1 Grand Prix. That's probably good, because there wasn't a lot of overtaking in Italy after the first few laps. No. None that were not team orders, anyway.
Well, yes, which is why, for my Move of the Week, I'm actually going to nominate Alex Albon here.
Oh,
this is a very, very strange left field one, which is kind of my
That's
corner.
good.
Speaking of corners we're painting ourselves into. Alex Albon's 7th in the World Championship.
Yes, ahead of Antonelli now.
And when you're looking at a series where you've got, in some sort of order, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull are clearly the 4 dominant teams, for anyone else to muscle into that top 8 in the World Championship from any other team is a pretty remarkable achievement. So he's had 11 points finishes in 16 Grand Prix. And this is the stat that I can't believe with Alex Albon. He has outscored his teammate Carlos Sainz 70 points to 16. Now, if anyone had that before the season started, then send me your details and we'll go have a very, very large dinner together or something. But who would have seen that coming? But he's had such a good season, and it's quite stark. You look at him on the points table now and go, okay, that's believable and sustainable, but it still makes you sit up. Yeah,
it is remarkable. I mean, some of that obviously was in those first 5 races, whatever it was, where Carlos Sainz was clearly not at home with the car. But I was sort of thinking about this on the drive-in here, weirdly enough, that Carlos Sainz is in a great position to score points this weekend. And then, in my opinion, caused a collision for which Oliver Bearman was penalised. And I understand why, but I think it was wrong. Totally needless. Like, totally needless to get himself in that position when he probably would have finished. He would have scored maybe 4 points, I think, more or less. Needed points, I think, because while it's clear the pace is there and he's kind of thereabouts, and like any driver that moved this year, it's so easy to say, well, we're here because of 2026. Like, we're not here because of 2025. We're here to get our feet under the desk. I don't know, it's starting to get a little bit, I don't want to say too grim for Carlos, but it doesn't look great.
16 points in 16 rounds.
Yeah.
Very, very average. So that's my take on Move of the Week. It is a move. It's moved into 7th place in the World Championship, but I dare say you've probably got something for this category more on track.
Well, I really liked, it was on track, Oscar Piastri's move on Charles Leclerc. I think it was on lap 2, but there were quite a few moves between them. Charles Leclerc really summed it up really well, like a tiny mistake and someone passes. I thought if that was the tone of the race, I thought we were in for a really cracking 1 hour and 12 minutes.
12 minutes,
it was.
yes. Alas not.
But I really like this move around the outside of the first chicane. Because at that point, the talk of the weekend with this, what was a 34-point lead, was that he didn't need to take too many risks. You play the numbers game, you're going to be okay. This was a really risky move.
Absolutely.
It required trust in Leclerc, and Leclerc is a guy you can... I'm trying to think now, but I'm struggling to think of any major mistake he's made in a combat situation like that. Just really gutsy to put his car there, knowing the risk was there that he might be eliminated, and all of a sudden a loss of 3 points to Norris could be a loss of 18. Be very fair, wouldn't it, after the Dutch Grand Prix? I just really enjoyed that move. It showed that he's still out there really trying to go hard at these races. There's no inclination to think about the points lead. It is still about winning races and stamping his authority on the series. And the point you mentioned is knowing who you're racing against. Yes. I think that's a big part of that. There are certain people you would not put your car in that particular position with. And the second Mark Webber reference of the podcast this week, I'm thinking Alonso, Webber, Rouge. Yeah, well, there's no other 2 drivers almost that you could pull that off with. Yeah, absolutely. And the reason that Mark went for that, where he went for it, was because of who he was racing against. A, because it's awesome if it comes off, and B, because I can trust this guy to do the right thing. Yes. And there was a much lower scale version of that going on with Piastri and Leclerc. But I like the fact that
you sum up who you're racing against and you race that person accordingly or not, based on the situation. That's why I think it's a really good nomination.
It's worth remembering that as well. And every time a driver says, "Oh, I don't know who's in the other car, I just see the other car," it's not true.
Yeah,
It's
100%.
Obviously not true. Let's move on away from Formula One briefly to interested versus expert.
Ooh.
Because we've had a Moto GP round in which I'm interested. This weekend we'll have a Supercars round. I'll tell you about that in a moment. Or I can tell you about that now. You tell me.
I'll be more interested. You can be the expert. How does that sound?
Okay.
Let's do now. All I know. This is how interested I am.
Yes.
First enduro of the season at the Bend.
Yes, first at Bend.
Yes.
Not at Sandown, which
Yes.
is unusual.
Yeah, indeed.
Sandown is later though. Sandown gets a final slot.
Because it's a separate season in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
Like, what's the narrative going into this? Because it's unusual, as you said, to have the first enduro at this particular track.
Yeah, this is a question I've been wondering for the last few weeks. I was in Sydney a couple of weeks ago, or last week, for the Bathurst launch event. You may have seen that on our website, on social media. There's more stuff from that later anyway. And it struck me because I really like the Bathurst as the idea as a standalone. It didn't used to be part of the championship. It was a race in which you just go all out. And it was an iconic event. It still is an iconic event, but it plays a role in the championship. And in previous years, before the final series, it was important to the narrative of the championship, whoever scored the most points, potentially affect the order. It still does that to an extent because there are the bonus points for the finals. But it's much more standalone now. If you're Brock Feeney or Will Brown or even all the way down, Brody Kostecki and even lower, it's kind of a bit of a free hit. I know this is 2 rounds away from the Bend, but stick with me. I put this to a couple of drivers and they said, yes, except if you are on the bubble for the finals.
Oh, yeah.
Because all of a sudden you've got these 2 big points paying races, 300 points, all the points in one event. That's a lot of risk for guys who are on the bubble for the final. So I want to look at, I've got the points written down here because I'll get them wrong, and the points, there's a lot of big numbers in Supercars. Anton Di Pasquale is 7th. He's 104 points ahead of 10th place, which is held by Thomas Randall, right?
Okay.
Andre Hamgaard is only 21 points ahead in 8th. Ryan Wood's only 14 points ahead. Just out of here, this is a story. I've been fascinating to see how this ends up by the end of the season, or by the finals, I guess. Kai Allen, 11th, only 20 points out because of this late surge in the last couple of rounds, I suppose, after starting as a rookie. And then Cameron Hill, who was in the 10 earlier in the year, has had a bit of a rough time of things in the last, 2 or 3 rounds. He's 108 points out. Obviously, there are more drivers involved, but for me, I could be totally wrong, which would be remarkable. Not because I'd be wrong, but because it'd be a great story. 100 points either side feels like you'd need a pretty big twist. Because the other thing is, it's not as if, not all of these drivers are going to DNF and then Cameron Hill's going to be in the end of the Bend. Chances are most of them will score points.
Yep.
I think that's really interesting for them because this is the total opposite now of the Bend and Bathurst of a free hit. You've really got to play the points in a way you haven't in the Enduros before. Because if you were 10th last year, you're not going to win the championship. You just go and try and win it.
Yep.
You're going to still try and win it now, but now you're going to be super aware of where these other drivers are. And I think that's a really interesting and maybe understated so far twist in the Enduro season.
Well, and where these particular drivers sit in the order of the race, you'll need to have eyes on 2 different parts of the timing tower here because you might not necessarily be watching a guy competing in the top 4. But hang on, this guy's 8th in this race. What does that mean relative to the guys he's racing against? I do like it.
Yes, there's a real dual element to the Enduros this year. One is that we're just going to find out who's going to win the first Bend Enduro and then, of course, the Bathurst 1000. The second element is obviously who's going to win the finals, how they do it. I hope we've invested in a live sub-championship leaderboard, 10th place leaderboard. But it'll be very interesting to see. So that's something to keep an eye out. The Bend this weekend, the first, the curtain raiser for Bathurst, I suppose.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about Barcelona because I believe, I say deliberately, A. Marquez won.
A. Marquez, yes. A. Marquez did win the
Yes.
race. This is a funny one in that, Marc Marquez came into this weekend on a 14-race winning streak, which sounds as silly as it is. But going to a track where it's not a great circuit for Marc, the circuit to Barcelona, Catalunya, which sounds ridiculous. And he has won here. The only 2 times he's won this Grand Prix, 2014 when he won the first 10 races of the season, 2019 where he finished every race bar 1 in first or second. So it's been absolutely top shelf Marc that's won here. It's a Moto GP track and he's on the best bike in the field, but it's the configuration of this particular circuit. We know Marc's got this supernatural ability in left-handers. This track only has 2 more right-handers than left-handers, but it's the configuration of the right-handers. They're big, long radius right-hand corners, and it's where they are in the lap. And so Alex Marquez is particularly good through high-speed, long-radius right-handed turns. It's almost a perfect track. This and Malaysia are these two really strong tracks for that reason. And as good as Mark is, he wasn't fantastic at this track even before he had 4 shoulder surgeries from 2020 onwards. So it actually has been a bit of a weak point. So to my mind, they were kind of both winners here on the weekend, because Alex Marquez, after he chucked it in the sprint, which was one of the silliest mistakes we've seen for a very long while, Mark ended up winning that race to win 15 straight races. But the way this Grand Prix built on Sunday, you had Alex and Mark were just in a totally different league. Everyone else was a million miles behind. And if you're Alex Marquez, after you've thrown it down the road in the sprint from victory the previous day, and you've got a guy on a 15-race winning streak sitting within 2 to 6/10 of a second for 16 consecutive laps, that's a lot of pressure to soak up. And also, you can almost know your enemy too well, in that because they're brothers and they know each other's strengths and weaknesses so well. That's a different feeling for Alex Marquez to know, I've got this guy behind me. It's not just some random opponent who you may not know that well, and therefore probably takes some of the stress out of being pursued by Marc Marquez. So tremendous win for him, really coolly executed. It's a really tactical race, Barcelona, because it's a super low grip track. It's really hot. And it comes down to the point that you're not going to have 24 laps of tyre life. You've probably got about 18 good laps. It's just when do you deploy them? And so it turns into this really canny, strategy-based race, which we don't often see in MotoGP because they're 40-minute races. It's always a different feel there. But the fact that Marc Marquez hung that close to his brother, who's very, very good at this circuit with its configuration, Mark didn't win, but it's the next best thing, right? And I guess the interesting part about all of this now is that it has taken away the chance for Marc Marquez to win this 7th MotoGP World Championship at Misano this weekend. There was a part of me that was kind of hoping it might happen in Valentino Rossi's backyard just for the narrative and the storyline, but it looks very likely that it's now going to be decided in Japan, which, given it was 3 years ago that Mark told Honda in Japan that he was leaving them to go to Ducati to kickstart this second part of his career, it quite neatly closes the circle. So if that ends up becoming the story, then great. But it was just a really interesting tactical race between two guys at the absolute top of their game. Enea Bastianini, I think, finished 6 seconds off in 3rd place, and no one else was within 10 seconds. You do not see that in modern-day MotoGP. They were in an absolute class of their own. It was very, very tense, high-quality racing.
And the part of you that wanted the championship to be won in San Marino is not the part that has to read the social media comments, I'm guessing. So.
Yeah, not that part. Absolutely not that
Enjoyed the race. Enjoyed Alex Marquez rolling through the gravel afterwards. It felt very random to me, but I enjoyed it. But it was great. The brotherly element to this, which is obviously not very rare in any sport, but certainly even in MotoGP until this year.
Well, this is crazy, right? So we were talking about this off air before. Until Mark and Alex were on the podium together in Germany last year, that was the first time since 1997 we'd had siblings on the same MotoGP podium. If you add the sprints in the Grand Prix this year, 17 podiums they've shared this year. Now, the scoreline is Mark 15, Alex 2, which you could probably imagine. But imagine, two brothers at the absolute peak of their powers sharing podiums in the elite level of their particular motorsport. Short of, I was listening to Matt Oxley's podcast, which is one you should absolutely listen to and everyone else should listen to as well. He was talking about siblings being at the absolute top of their game in worldwide sports, and he was talking about Serena and Venus Williams. And it's hard to think of too many others other than that. This is what these two guys are doing this year. It's been pretty amazing to watch.
Yeah, it's a special moment. Marquez era, we're certainly in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And great for Alex as well. Like, you wouldn't have thought he'd be in the position, okay, he's drifted way off the championship lead compared to where he was at the start. But that's a great story to see his rise in MotoGP as well.
Well, also, a guy, by the time you get to your 6th MotoGP season, your career arc is kind of written at that point. We kind of know who you are. He's 28, 29 years old now. So guys don't normally have career best seasons this late into their career. And so he's done wonders for his own reputation and how we see him as a rider. It's just that the guy he shared a bedroom with back in the day is just a bit better.
Yes, unfortunately for him. Interesting round in motorsport. Also this week will be fascinating to see the bend, but we can't wrap up before visiting the crystal ball for complete home filtration.
Oh no.
Matt, I only know this because it's still written down on my run sheet. I predicted a Ferrari victory in Monza last week. So
you did.
It tells you about the calibre of the crystal ball on this show, but why don't you?
I predicted Aprilia would win in Catalonia, and Marco Bezzecchi didn't score a point. That's how well that went. My crystal ball, and this goes back to the guy who won the Italian Grand Prix, Max Verstappen. 80 seconds behind Max Verstappen was the guy in the other Red Bull in Yuki Tsunoda.
Someone we did not talk about.
No, and would have no reason to talk about except for the fact that, are we sure he's going to be in this car for the rest of the year?
I don't think Red Bull's sure about that.
Yeah. So my crystal ball has Isaac Hadjar in that car before the season's out. Simply because you look at last year, they kept Sergio Perez in that car for the entire year, and he was cooked a long way before the season finished. And they just rode it out and then sacked him after the season, after they'd signed him. And then look at the chaos that caused at the beginning of this season. Liam Lawson's in. Oh, 2 races in. 1 week into the season, Liam Lawson's out. Let's promote Yuki Tsunoda. We didn't really want him in the first place. We'll put him in the car. It hasn't worked. So at this point, why would you then, if you're going to make the change for 2026, which let's be honest, they probably are going to make the change, why would you not just do it now? Take some of the sting out of the start of next year. There's going to be enough going on in Formula One generally and for that team specifically at the start of next year, new powertrains, everything else going on for 2026. Why not just bring him in? You're not going to lose 4th place in the World Championship for the Constructors. No. That's where you're going to be. Why not just bring him in for the last 3 or 4 rounds? Just get it done, get him in there, get his feet under the table. Or you're just going to make the same mistake as you did at the beginning of this year, and then we live this entire narrative all over again. I can actually see Isaac Hadjar in the second Red Bull by the end of the season, and it'll be something that Helmut Marko just decides to mention in some random press opportunity that he's not supposed to be doing with Austrian TV because he's not actually a team spokesperson, but that would be very fitting with the way this season has gone.
I like it. I hesitate to use the phrase duty of care like the Christian Horner did in that press release, sacking Liam Lawson from the team. But I do wonder whether you would, because normally I would agree and say, why not just start now? But with new rules next year, with this car killing so many careers, is it in Hadjar's best interest to not finish the season at a team where he's got this beautiful trajectory as a rookie and then switch next year when we have, I forget how many days it is, but it's 3 or 4 pre-season tests?
Yes.
Like a lot of time in the car. Unlike this year, we had 1.5 days per driver. Next year, you're going to have a lot of days. I actually see the cost-benefit equation a little bit less to doing that. But on the other hand, Yuki Tsunoda scored 7 points. No, it's more now. 10 points, is it?
Yeah.
Red Bull Racing?
Yeah.
It's not great. But I like it.
I mean, look, it's a little left field for a crystal ball, but given the way Red Bull's gone this year, perhaps not so left field. But,
no, it is. I do think, though, that practically predicted that Helmut Marko will announce it probably to... What is it? Kleinzeitung in Austria?
That's the one.
I think that's probably a guaranteed prediction, to be honest.
He'll announce something.
Yes.
It may even be the truth.
Yes, something will be announced. I'm going a bit of a different direction. Andrea Kimi Antonelli had another, what I thought was interesting, Toto Wolff described as, I think his word was underwhelming.
Underwhelming, yeah.
Underwhelming race. First criticism from Toto Wolff. He said, he tried to say it wasn't a criticism, but it was critical. We're at the end of the European season in which we assumed we'd see the best of him because of the tracks he knows well. Instead, I think he scored about 10 points, maybe even actually fewer. Canada, the exception, punctuates the European season. He got his maiden podium there, bizarrely. Leaving Europe, I think we're now going to see the best of Antonelli.
Yeah.
Tracks, it just seems like tracks he doesn't know. The pressure equation in his mind changes a little bit.
Yep.
So I think we're going to see him. I'm just going to say he's going to out-qualify and outrace George Russell in Azerbaijan. Not to say he's going to be on the podium or anything, but I think we're actually going to see all that early season promise again at the end of the season now that we're on tracks that he has no right to perform at.
Well, the less pressured environment, I think, is a really good point, because what did everyone talk about at Monza this weekend? Oh, this is where he threw it off at Parabolica in his first free practice last year. We kept going back to that. So perhaps a clean slate and less expectations. He's still a kid, let's be perfectly honest here. And perhaps the human element of all of this might actually come into play. I don't mind it. I think that's got more of a chance to be correct than most of your crystal balls, let's be honest.
Doesn't say a lot, though.
No, it doesnend.
That's all the time we have for Pit Talk. You can subscribe to Pit Talk wherever you get your favourite podcasts, and you can leave us a rating and review as well. This weekend, it's the Bend 500 at the Bend, with lights out at 2:15 on Sunday, and that'll be followed by the San Marino and Rimini Riviera Motorcycle Grand Prix in Misano, with lights out at 10 p.m. on Sunday as well. You can get up to date with all the latest Formula One, Moto GP and Supercars news at foxsports.com.au. From Matt Clayton and me, Michael Laminato, thanks very much for your company. We'll catch you next week.